Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We'll wait just a couple of minutes so everyone can join.
Hi, Imran. Just doing a quick sound check on my end. Can you hear me well? And Lauren too? Cool.
I'll do a sound check as well. How am I?
Perfect. Perfect audio.
Awesome. So I think we can get started. So let's begin with some quick introductions. Let's start with Lauren.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Lauren Haag. I lead business intelligence here at Rent the Runway. I say here because I'm actually in our office in Brooklyn right now. If anyone doesn't know what Rent the Runway is, we're a clothing rental company. We specialize actually in a subscription product where you could rent clothing for your everyday use. And we also have what we call a reserve business where you can rent more high-end fashion for, weddings, formal events. I've spent most of my career in data or data adjacent areas, spent some time at some larger companies like Disney, Walmart, DocuSign, and I've been here at Rent the Runway leading this, our business intelligence team for a year and a half.
Thanks, Lauren. And over to you, Arnaud.
Thanks a lot, Imran. So I'm Arnaud, CPO at Castor, a data discovery tool. And before that, I was head of data at PayFit, an HR tech unicorn. I built a data team from scratch to over 15 people. And prior to that, I had different data jobs in a company called Criteo, who does the amazing retargeting ads business. They invented it. Different data jobs, including data product management over there for the 300 plus data people at that company.
Thanks, Arnaud. And to round out, I'm Imran. I'm going to be your moderator today. My background, so I'm a VC at an early stage fund called Blossom Capital. My background prior to venture, however, was running data teams. So super excited to be moderating this discussion today. So to start with, we'll spend a quick 5 minutes, just set a bit of the context, and then spend the vast majority of the time listening to Lauren and Arnaud's experiences. If at any time you have questions, feel free to ask them. In fact, we encourage you to ask them. There's a little button on the bottom right of your corner of your screen where you can just submit any questions and we'll get to them at the end, as many as we can. So let's dive in. So I'm sure to many of you, it's not really surprising what's going on. The number of people who are responsible for and for using data is exploding within organizations. More data is being collected. And with that, there's ever more tools in your data stack. And So with this proliferation of data discovery has become increasingly hard. You see a few examples on the screen here, but the key takeaway is that the data discovery challenge is affecting everyone, both within the data team, but also stakeholders outside it, who really rely upon the data to make their decisions on a day-to-day basis and for like the daily analysis they have to do. And a key part of this is that across the modern data stack, it's siloed within each tool. We have no real transparency around who's using it, when the data was updated, how trustworthy that data is at a given moment, which makes all of our jobs a lot harder, and likely why you're joining us for this discussion today. And so with that, we have a very simple but quite important goal for today, and that is to share the tips from Lauren and Arnaud's experiences to really help you return to your teams with some proven strategies to help tackle data discovery within your organizations. And now we'll close this out and turn to the discussion. Awesome. So Lauren, as you mentioned in your introduction, you lead the BI function at Rent the Runway. Tell us a little bit about how the data team is structured and your function's role within the company.
Sure. So data's been a key component of Rent the Runway's business model and culture for a really long time. And we have a pretty sizable data team here of about 40 people. And they cover many, many different areas. So we have a team of machine learning engineers, we have a data engineering team, and we have several data science teams that focus on particular verticals. And then we have our business intelligence team. And this business intelligence team, I mentioned that I started a year and a half ago. The BI team in its current function started a year and a half plus 1 month ago. So we're fairly new in this form. And the team started with just one analyst focused on our fulfillment center operations, and we grew to support CX, transportation, people, inventory, retention, and growth. So we now actually cover like the full span of data at Rent the Runway, which is pretty sizable, complex data for the size of the company. We really have a super interesting but complex business model, and it just like leads to so much interesting data. And we have on the data stack side a really common modern data stack here. We use Snowflake, dbt, Prefect, Looker, and now Castor. And there are several other more technical tools that the data scientists, machine learning engineers, and data engineers use as well.
Thanks. That's really helpful context for my next question, which is that a lot of data leaders out there are thinking about data discovery, but often these goals aren't at the top of the priority list. So can you share what sparked the data accessibility initiative at Rent the Runway and what you were trying to solve with it?
Yeah, for sure. So when I first joined the company, probably a couple months in, we fielded a survey to everyone at Rent the Runway to see how they viewed data accessibility at Rent the Runway. And we anticipated, varying responses depending on the team because they've gotten different, different attention given to them over the years. But the responses from the data team itself were actually very interesting. And we saw that the folks on the data team ranked the question of I can find the data I need just lower than we would have anticipated. It wasn't like a horrible score, but it was just lower. We would hope that we were all, at like 100% across the board. We are the data team, but we were really struggling with it. And I mentioned we have a very complex business. We have a lot of complex data. It's not actually that surprising, but it's not what we actually want. So that was a kind of a wake up moment for us, where we realized we likely have a data discovery problem, and we just spent over the next like 6 months after that survey really digging in and seeing where some of these issues were. Our team was growing and we were covering more areas, so it was a really great ramp into seeing like where some of these pain points were. So, and the other thing I'll mention is we're an older company than you might actually think. We've been around for approaching 15 years. So that's 15 years of documentation debt. And we of course knew the documentation was important, but the tooling we had in place just wasn't supporting the amount of documentation that we really needed to do. We were doing a little bit in dbt, a little in Confluence, a little probably in Google Sheets, and it was just really spread out. So we needed a way to like bring everything together and weave it into people's actual like day-to-day development.
Arnaud, I'd love to hear your perspective of this. I know in your introduction you mentioned you were the head of data at PayPit before coming over to lead product at Castor. So how are your challenges at PayPit, similar or different from the ones that Lauren faced? And more generally, how are you trying to, what are the challenges you're looking to help companies solve with Castor?
Yeah, Sure. So with Payfit, basically, the company was already 300 people strong when I joined as the first data hire. But in basically 6 months, we, thanks to 5-turn stitch and so on, and thanks to DBT models, we created potentially 500 tables and about 100 DBT models. And you had the data team, which I had created, but you of course had other prior data, not data people, but data users, of course, right? Who were involved in LookML and so on. And these ones were struggling because of so many tables created, because of so many LookML, Looker dashboards and so on created. So even though the company was not far from it, 15 years old, it was becoming so quickly a big mess. And it's actually, I mean, it's one of the inconvenience of having tools that create data so easily now, which has amazing benefits, which we all want, but it comes at a cost, which is basically you create a data mess super quickly, and discovery needs are pretty similar based on that, basically. So, and the most simple question with such as, okay, that column, how many tables, what are all of the tables who contain that exact column? And answering that was not super easy. And it starts with much more, it goes further with much more complex use cases, of course, but just starting there was not an easy one. Starting there. And the second part of the question, Imran, was more on Castor. Can you repeat it? Sorry.
Oh, so what are the challenges you're looking to help companies solve with Castor now?
Definitely. So it's simply the pain of data discovery, whether there is an effort of documentation or not. I think, Lauren, as you mentioned, a lot of companies have documentation debt, and there's still content out there to help data analysts find their way, even without documentation. So we want Castor to be the first level of support, the first help, and of course to push and enable teams to document efficiently in there. But it has to be the source of truth where everything of the existing documentation is in there, and then what you add on top. But it's really the place where you're going to have other ways to do discovery than through documentation as well, such as social exploration, checking who's used what, who's done what with it, such as lineage, of course, understanding how data flows to understand if you can use it, and so on. So it's really, from day one, improve heavily the data experience, the data discovery experience, whether there is documentation or not. And of course, enable, show the way forward with documentation, I would say.
I'd love to understand what this looks like in practice. Lauren, I'd love to understand how improved data discovery has made an impact on specific initiatives your team has taken on recently. What have you been working on, and what benefits have you seen from the better data accessibility?
Yeah. I'll even mention, I think that what was really interesting about the process of trying to choose a tool here was just like looking at the data catalog kind of landscape or data discovery landscape. There were, a lot of enterprise tools out there. And I think what Arnaud's talking about is like we had a really specific problem, and some of these enterprise tools are trying to solve like every problem and not solving the one that like we had as specific as we needed and the way we needed. And so what I liked from Castor was like, it was definitely angled on the problem that we had, which was like really field documentation and then this table and column lineage concept. So we basically in the last half of our that we just had of our year, put our heads down to really document our most popular tables. And so we chose the ones that were, if you're in Castor, like a popularity of 4+, and we just decided like we need to document these. And one of the things that I realized is going to people and just saying like document these tables or else like it doesn't work. You have to set targets, you have to show people their progress, and you have to like be gold towards getting to 90% or 95%. Otherwise, just no one just wants to like spend their Friday afternoon documenting a table. So trying to put those like targets in place and that motivation in place and like showing progress was really, really important to actually getting us going, because it's always the thing that goes to the bottom of the pile. It's just so easy to decide to skip. And so that was key. It was just showing progress.
Arnaud, when you put yourself in the head of data shoes, what are some of the common initiatives that good data discovery makes easier?
Sure. So I think, as Lauren mentioned, if you want to increase coverage in documentation, you need to project manage it. You need someone internally, you need a sponsor as well. Of course, and this is something we've realized with Castor is, as you mentioned, right, people hate documenting. They won't do that proactively. Of course, and so some will, let's say, but it's a small portion of people, not everyone. Some people play always for the team, and some are more individualistic. It's how people are. It's human. There's a part of human nature. There's a part of balance. And documentation is basically, if you document something, it means you're not doing it for yourself because you know the answer and you're just adding documentation in, right? So you have to. It's tricky because it's if everyone gives 5% of their time documenting, everyone ends up winning 20% of their time because everything is documented. But in that case, I want to be the only one who does not document so that I get those 19.9% of time saving and I don't lose anything, basically. And so based on that, with Castor, again, it's super important to improve the discovery without documentation while pushing people to document. And where we help, I believe, is basically on making sure that every piece of documentation that is added to Castor has the highest impact possible. I think we've talked about the potential of having column lineage description propagation. So basically, if we know, and Castor knows that a column is only using one other column to be created, and there's no transformation in there, then we're going to offer the description of the parent to be shown on the children, which will basically multiply the impact of having the description for a column. And we have this concept everywhere. It's as much as we can try to reduce the friction of documenting and increase the impact of the documentation effort as much as possible, always. Because again, people hate documenting, so that 1 minute that someone spent documenting, we need to make the most of it.
Amazing. So we've talked a bit about why data discovery is important, but obviously embarking on a data accessibility journey is very different from succeeding in one. So Lauren, what elements did you identify as critical to motivate the team? And what were the strategies that were key to your progress in your data accessibility journey?
Yeah, and I think I already touched on a main one, which is on that showing progress, like making sure that it's really, really clear what kind of progress we've hit. And I think the other thing is just kind of like the relationship we were able to develop with Castor. I think the ability to have like a conversation with a company that like actually cares about data documentation in this like very nerdy way was also, at least it was motivating to me. I was like, this is an obvious problem. We see it in a lot of companies. And I think having that like validation that this is important was actually very, very helpful. Having folks, looking at talking about the way we were structuring DBT, I think that it's opened up like a lot of really helpful conversations within the data team by just giving visibility like to this metadata that we just like couldn't see before. So again, on the strategy side, I'm going to say like tracking progress is the most important. And then the other thing is just like having a tool that's like helping you answer these questions that you have and like filling in these pain points that you have. I didn't, even when we were, when I started on the data catalog like journey, I didn't realize how important table lineage was going to be. And how amazing having that like as a functionality in a tool was just going to like unlock a lot of efficiency for the team. And so it's not necessarily a strategy. It's almost just like this like ability to see how you called it a mess, Arnaud, like to see how the mess of tables actually talk to each other ended up just kind of changing our day-to-day development patterns. Like when I have a question about a table now, I go to Castor to see how it was built. That's like a complete change in how, if I go back a year ago, I would have done something. I think that part is really, really cool. Like we have in, 6 to 8 months of having a product actually completely changed our development patterns. And so again, not really a strategy. It's just like a flip of how we do things. And I think that's like actually pretty amazing for a team that's like just kind of using DBT and GitHub for years. And this is like now that's woven in very fast.
That was great to hear. Arnaud, beyond tracking documentation, what benefits do you keep in mind when building the product to ensure Castor can be adopted across the organization? For example, how can data leaders think about things like improved collaboration or efficiency?
Yeah, sure. So the other thing we heavily focus on is make people realize they're part of an internal company, internal data community. They're not alone. They're not the only users, and they need to realize that. In the sense that it's pretty rare that someone is the first user of a given data asset, or sometimes it's not that. It's pretty rare as well to be the first one to ask that question, whether the answer lies in data, basically. And so there's a concept we call social expression, which is basically, okay, if I need specific data from, let's say, marketing on Google Ads, for example, then I will start not by typing in Castor Google Ads, but I will think, okay, who's in my opinion the expert on that data, that basically this topic. Then I will go on their profile in Castor, and I will check the queries they write, the dashboard they own, the table they own, and from that I can maybe find the table I'm looking for instead of openly like freely searching for something. And I think starting from that person, from someone, is sometimes much more efficient than starting from just a free text search, which is always something you can finish doing if you end up doing if you didn't find through someone. But it's a bit more efficient. And of course, when in the end there's no documentation and you've checked lineage, you've checked different sources, and you still don't get the answer, knowing who to ask is already an amazing shortcut with what was because before that it was like, okay, you had to ask someone who would direct you to someone who would then direct you to someone, and then you get the answer. Knowing directly who to ask when there is nothing in Castor is as well something we hope we want to be as helpful as it can be.
I mean, a quick follow-up question. When you think about adoption across a company, how do you ensure a single product can address the needs of so many different types of users? How do you optimize for usability?
Cool, thanks. I think I'm going to put a blunt answer on this one. I think you don't solve all users' needs. You need to pick. You need to be decided. You need and as Lauren said, you need to pick a main use case, a top use case, and then of course solving this use case will create assets in the tool that will help other users, of course, in other use cases. But we do discovery, and we need to be heavily focused on this one because there are other folks in the area we can say data quality, data observability, and so many other things. The focus here is discovery. And when you go back to discovery, it's just making sure that people can find and use autonomously the data they need to do their daily job. And say that there's a matter of consumption. It's people who, of course, we do help heavily, thanks to lineage, analytics engineers or data engineers as well. But the primary focus is on the data analysts, the people who need data to do their job, to build dashboards, to answer questions, to have an impact, a direct impact on the business. And so this is why we've made the interface as smooth, as easy to understand. And we need to make sure that we don't overwhelm the interface so that the onboarding is as smooth as possible. And you can also use Castor as a way to democratize data access as a let's say less steep learning curve to your data stack in a way. That's how we think of it. But of course, I'm far from saying that like for example, if you look at lineage, recomputing all of the lineage is something pretty heavy, but it's just a matter of rendering simplicity in the tool.
So great answer.
Yeah, I hope we do that, Lauren. You tell me anytime.
Lauren, going back to you, what are some of the factors you're weighing when thinking about the broader data accessibility within the organization? How are you thinking about balancing accessibility versus support across the different kinds of business stakeholders outside of the data team?
Yeah, so we're using Looker as our main tool for making data more accessible across Rent the Runway. We, that's where we document descriptions that are stakeholder facing. That's where we, expect people to learn how to self-service their data, and that is our like business facing data democratization effort. So it's very nice that Castor also links into Looker, and we have that lineage through Looker because that is our business-facing UI. That said, we do have some people across Rent the Runway who do use Snowflake, and we've been considering granting Castor access to finance, some folks in product, some engineers. we don't want those teams to actually rely on Snowflake, though. I would prefer they be able to self-service in Looker in data sets that are more curated for their needs. So I haven't rushed to do that yet, but there are a few folks I have in mind that I might open up Castor access to, and Castor actually allows for like viewer access, which is definitely what I would give them. But we're really trying to reel back in the Snowflake access, so it's a delicate balance of like who should have access. So, and that's, you know, speaking to, you know, echoing what Arnaud said, like that's why I like that the tool is built for data folks in mind, because that is our main use case in that 99% of the time.
Great. This is interesting, Lauren. You're touching here kind of the balance of like the hard point of democratizing data access without being submerged by request or support or even duplication of meaning for your metrics because other people not from the data team are touching it. It's like I see the kind of balance that you have to find here. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and we will very frequently document a field differently in, you know, on top of the DBT model than I would in Looker. Like what a stakeholder needs to see is just different. And so it is odd because you will have different definitions technically for like the same field, but the use case is so different. And yes, it's a delicate balance.
I know, I'm sure many of Lauren's considerations are very familiar with you as a former head of data yourself. What are the common challenges for data leaders that you've encountered as you built Castor, and what are your recommendations for solving them?
Cool. So actually, I'm going to repeat myself. Because basically that's the comment I've made. It's always super hard because as a data leader, you're in charge of the data product in a way. If you think of data as a product in your company, whether you think of your analytics suite and the data stack as the technical stack behind it, you want to increase usage as much as you can. But you have your existing team, and staffing is limited, especially in those days. So you don't want to overwhelm them with support cases and so on. So you need to find the right balance. I think Discovery helps with that, helps with making the existing team more efficient and the existing users more efficient. And then from the moment you decrease, thanks to structuring the tribal knowledge in the tool, thanks to lineage, thanks to a few other, let's say, optimized use cases, then you could consider opening up access to more users. But it's always something it's one of the balance, and I think, and the other balance is also with that we do see from several of our customers is the balance with security, right? Because if you open up access, the easiest way to hide it, like to be safe, is to stay hidden, to show nothing, right? So of course, this is not possible for business purposes, for business sakes. We've seen how much data can spark innovation, but it requires to be known and used to spark innovation. But there's this right balance between let's say, support and security with, let's say, democratization that needs to be found. That's right.
Definitely. And so final question to both of you before we turn to the audience questions. What advice would each of you have for other data leaders as they look to unlock data discovery within the organizations? And Lauren, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to bounce a little bit back for a second because I realized I should have talked about our enormous migration effort in this. And if anyone is going to go through some sort of BI tool migration effort, you think that data discovery should be like a thing you're for sure thinking about. So we've been migrating from Tableau to Looker for over a year. It takes a long time to migrate out of a BI tool when you've been in it for years and years and years. So the biggest compliment I can probably give Castor on this one is like, I wish I had Castor from the beginning. I probably would have changed my strategy on migration had I had this tool in hand, because I learned so much about like how our data sets were connected or not connected together, like in this migration effort. And so I just wanted to highlight that when because it's been such a big thing on the BI team's mind, and I'm sure like the word migration just like triggers panic in all my analysts because it is a heavy amount of work. And so anyways, on what advice I would give, that's a key component of advice. If you're doing any sort of like big effort, you need to make sure you have like tools in place that help your analysts do that work efficiently. Otherwise, it just feels increasingly tedious, and it has felt like that for, especially before we had Castor on this migration work. And so on the advice side, I would be really surprised if any companies think that they are doing this perfectly. If any company is like, we have the best documentation, I would love to see it, because it is really, really hard. Every day you create a new field, a new table, and did you document it perfectly? It's very hard to keep up with it. So I would, the biggest piece of advice is like, start now. Don't wait until you are like us and have an embarrassing number of tables. Arnaud, I would love to have 500 tables. That sounds so nice. You have many multiples more of that. And it's really, really hard once you've been around for, a decade plus and you just have a lot of debt. So I would start now. The sooner the better. And if I was at a company with 50 tables, this would be on my list tomorrow. Like start documenting, get ahead of it. And so that you don't have to do all of this catch-up work. And then on the other side of advice, I said it before, set targets, like set stretch targets, but make sure they are realistic. I've set several like OKRs or before I had Castor in hand. And then once I had it and I had this data and I was like, this target's impossible. And that's happened several times. I didn't know what I didn't know. And being okay about resetting things as you learn more is good too. But make sure you have those targets and like understand what is doable for where you guys are in your data discovery journey.
Arnaud, any advice from you?
Yeah, sure. So I really enjoy thanks for sharing on migration, Lauren, because what I see from discussion with customers, with potential customers, sometimes they do see Castor as the cherry on the cake, like the icing of the cake. Basically, they want to build the perfect stack, and on top they will put amazing documentation. And actually, to me, Castor, the messier the data, the more value Castor is supposed to have, because the more of the a Google map of your data Castor will be. So if everything is well structured, is well created, then it's easy to do. So the more messy your data is, the more value Lineage will have, documentation automation will have, and so on. So I think this is the first key element of migration to go further. And the second one, and goes with Lauren, is start with popular content. Like Castor is built on popularity. It's a pattern I've pushed from day one, and I'm keep pushing heavily. It's what, like, you may not like that people use that table, but if they use it, it means they need it, and they don't know, or they're not aware, or they use it today. So document them. Take your top 10. Start just top 10 tables and document them. It will, because every time you do an onboarding, that someone will use those top 10 tables. As simple as that. So in terms of impact, start with popular tables. That's going to be advice one. Advice two, ownership. We do see like a crazy difference in documentation coverage across our customers based on, do they assign owners to document tables or not? And the ones that, of course, assign owners to document track a completion have a much higher rate, of course. So assigning ownership, and it doesn't have to be, and people are always afraid of ownership because they feel that they own the table. If there's an issue on the table, they're going to own it. No, it's just documentation of ownership, like complete it. Then you can remove the owner if you want, just complete it. I think that would be advice number two.
Awesome. I think that's some great advice from both participants. I think moving on from the prepared questions to the audience questions. First one up, I think we've had a couple of questions on this topic. How do you quantitatively measure the ROI on data discovery investments and initiatives? I mean, I know, Lauren, you touched on this, but then if you want to pick this one up.
That's like the hardest question to answer of all time. I think, and it's so funny working in data where we quantify everything for every other team, and then when we have to internally quantify things, it's so hard. And I think I would say the same thing. It is really hard for me to like quantify to a dollar amount of anything here. I really, if I'm going to try to quantify it, it's got to come back to analyst efficiency. I really think that's like the easiest way to put a dollar amount on it. I still would struggle. I think it would still be a little bit of a swag on like how much time I think people are gaining back here because of, being able to just do things faster. I don't know, Arnaud, maybe this is a better question for you because I'm sure you get asked this question by customers or prospective customers a lot.
Yeah. So I think a good one would be offboarding and onboarding. And like, I couldn't give you a precise number of ROI, but I can give you what drives the impact for sure. So the democratization effort, how much you want to democratize data. How many people do you want, like existing people of your company, do you want to be more efficient, more autonomous on your data, on your data stack? That's one. Number two is how many people, what's the in and out of data people in your company? Because we always think about the onboarding use case, right? You onboard someone on your data stack, you want them to be knowledgeable. So of course, data discovery helps a lot. But what about offboarding? Someone leaves, it's knowledge who's leaving the company too. So keeping that knowledge in is absolutely key. And this one is of course hard to measure, but I think, so the number of in and out per year in a company is definitely a great driver for that one. Another one is, of course, let's say the data stack complexity. How many data sources, how many DBT models? So the more complexity, the harder it gets for an analyst to do their day-to-day job without data discovery tool. So I think that this would be definitely three drivers, three, let's say, causality effort. Like, so if that one increases, the value of a data discovery tool increases as well. So that would be the three metrics. I may forget one or two, but
I'm sure the audience found that super helpful. So I think next question up is, who do you push to document? Is it the BI team members? Is it the engineers who are creating data sets? Is it everyone? Who should be doing the documentation work?
Well, I'm the head of BI, so I have the most, the highest ability to influence my team on documentation. So that is really where I started. It's encouraging the folks on BI to document the tables. They are assigned to owners of those, as owners of these highest popularity tables, and they are who I pushed. And but still, when looking at the top popularity tables, if I saw ones that were from ML or from data science, like they got assigned to owners, I just had to influence more and really encourage them to do it. I'm not in like the same team meetings with them, and I can't push as hard. So it's mostly BI, but it really has to be everybody. And it needs to be like a culture on your data team around documentation. And it ends up being the folks that are adding the most fields to the model and adding those tables that are highly used. That ends up being BI most of the time, at least at Rent the Runway. But it probably depends on the company, at like who has to be doing a lot of this documentation work. And like I said, we didn't have a BI team if you go back 2 years. So it would have been data scientists at that point that needed to do that documentation. It really just probably depends on your structure and how you are building data sets.
Yeah, and it's something we've discovered, right? It's super hard to we do get some, but it's hard to get documentation from non-owners, basically. So so if it has to, like, of course you get a much higher coverage if you have, let's say, a hierarchical support. Like if it's your boss who tells you to document, then you have targets and you do it, yes, for sure. But we do want with Castor, one of the goals of Castor is, and it's hard, but we do succeed, and we need to find even more levers to push it forward. It's to generate proactive documentation in a way. Like, it won't be on all of the columns of a given table for sure, but it's going to be, I'm an analyst. I've made a mistake on a query because I didn't know the specifics of how to use this column. I don't want other people to make a mistake. I'm just going to add that specific column information in there. And hey, be careful and so on. And of course, then we were careful to automatically send a warning to the owner of the table that say that someone has changed or added a description, so that they're aware and they can review it. But enabling end users to when they are in a pro bono mode, in a way, to contribute to the community and give back, it's definitely what we push for in Castor. It's hard because we're every one of us has heavy goals in a way. So giving back to everyone else in the company is not it's something that we have to do, but it's finding the time is not always easy. But with Castor, we want to make it as autonomous, as efficient as possible. That's one thing. And the second one is giving credit. I think showing who played for the team. Okay, you've added 10 descriptions on the table. You should be thanked. Like, people should be thankful. You've taken some of your time to contribute to the data community. So that should be seen in Castor. Castor should at least, and it's just to start with, reward you from showing to other people that you've contributed, you've played your part. That's the other way, from just the owners of the table who document. How do you get more from that?
That's great. So I think the next question is about data discovery in startups. How do you start and maintain documentation in a startup where the data are evolving and constantly growing? How do you manage that constant change of documentation that a high growth startup requires?
That's to you, Arnaud. I have no idea.
That's to me. All right, no worries. first thing is, of course, and I think that's how the question came from. Is basically everything changes so fast, so quickly. So it needs to be a kind of a recurring process. It's basically every quarter. Do we have our top 50, top 10? You start, but the top 50, top 100 most popular tables well documented. Because new tables get created, some others get deprecated, and so on. But what's important is the most popular content. Are they well documented or not? And of course, in startup, what's really cool is the content changes a lot, and this kind of makes me think of another kind of focus of Castor. So we want to help the end user. That's the key focus. But we do see, and as Lauren said, driving the effort is key. And Castor has the ability to simply show to data leads what is used, what is not, what content are used, what contents are not used. So I think that would help as well in startups to identify unused dashboard, unused tables, to simply archive them or delete them, so that you keep the focus. There's this concept in physics called entropy, where basically the mess always increases whatever you do. But with Castor, we want to help you get the mess to increase, but as slowly as possible, by keeping things clean when we can, basically. So it's a matter of, yes, focusing on what's popular, even if it changes. So it means redoing stuff every quarter, but not that crazy, I'm not saying. So in the previous job at Payfit, I tried to implement the enforced DBT documentation. You cannot put something in review if you don't document. And of course, after 2 months, the documentation for account ID was ID of the account. Great, thank you very much. Super useful, thank you. So enforcing stuff, honestly, it's pretty hard. And in systems, people find ways around it. It's more rewarding, good behavior, pushing forward. I think that would help.
Yeah, I'll echo on the popularity concept and being, I think the deprecation of unused things and working that into a process is really important, because I can see through our code base, like 15 years, maybe not 15, 10 years of Rent the Runway history. I would really only like to see 5. Like we should be cleaning out the legacy stuff more in a process driven way, but we just didn't have like really great visibility into it, in our prior years. And so now we are able to like bring some of that stuff into practice, but ideally we're doing this continuously. And now we're trying to, like even just use schemas as a way of making sure it's like, if something's in this schema, it's got to be good. We can't have things that are like not make, oh, I'm very worried about this table, or like it has a lot of problems. Like that shouldn't be in this schema that we want to be like our gold standard. And so trying to use like some tricks like that to make sure people understand that like we need high quality things that people can use in this spot is also kind of a helpful concept for us. So yeah, I echo that. We also in Looker, I clear out any dashboards or looks that haven't been used in 6 months, like just because we already, we've had Looker around for a year or so, and it's amazing how many dashboards and looks are already in there. It will just grow and grow and grow. And views. You need to like take control over it. It's one of the great features of Looker is like being able to see a lot of the details on how people on how people use things, just kind of like you get to see in Castor. And so you're just kind of in control of the data your team is generating. Like analyze it like you do anything else in the business.
Awesome. I think the next question is up for you, Lauren. It's a question about where do you put documentation? How do you decide what goes in Castor and what goes in Confluence or Looker or anywhere else?
Yes, we really limit how much we put in Confluence, I would say, in terms of like table or field documentation. It should really be more concept heavy, where you need a lot written down. Like you have a very complicated process, or you need to have drawings like that. That's the kind of stuff that goes in Confluence. Or data engineering team puts a lot in Confluence too to document processes. They'll also put some in GitHub, to be honest. But it's that it ends up being that proliferation of like, where do I go for something that ends up being very, very complex. So I think the most complicated one, the one I get most questions on are, should I put this in DBT or in Castor? And that's the one that I have to answer the most to. And I give like a very vague answer because I would prefer DBT, but if Castor is going to be easier, then I prefer that. I want it to be like unblocked as much as possible. And Castor ends up being like this great central repository for stuff. So the end result is I want the field documented and I want to be able to see it in Castor. And then you need to document it for your stakeholders in Looker. And then really avoid putting things in Confluence. I think what I've seen is when stuff ends up in Confluence, it usually means we have a really complicated concept. Can we actually simplify that so we don't need to put all of this stuff in Confluence? Because similar to everything else, we don't clear out Confluence, and it has, you know, pages that are 10 years old in it, and who knows if they can trust it. So you really like want to, especially for a data team, it makes sense for all of your like data, like this field level information as much as possible in one spot, which in our case is Castor, and then a little bit on Looker as well, on the LookML.
Awesome,
that's great. Good. Thanks, Lauren, for sharing that. It's something we're currently in beta is syncing back to DBT and to Looker. So to have a guest that you are, yeah, we talked about it, of course, right?
Yes,
and there's great potential on that.
Sure, syncing back would be really great. I think, but still through all of this process, we've like realized we have a lot of problems in our DBT manifest files, and like we again on the kind of like low visibility into what we were doing for a long time. And so, and I also say like our most popular description, which isn't surprising that's the most popular, but we had a pending as the description for thousands of fields. It wasn't pending. No one was working on it. It was just a filler description that we've gone and removed, and you either do it or you don't. There's really no middle ground on documentation. You're really like unlikely.
ID of the account, same thing.
Yep, ID is yes, yeah, we have the same thing with IDs. But anyways, yeah, the where to document question is is definitely like a hard one, and again, I think it's going to depend on what kind of tooling you have in place.
Yeah, one of the things we find interesting on that is if it's tied to a given data asset, people tend to put it directly in Castor, because then if it evolves, or in DBT, we do sync what is in DBT into Castor, as you know, of course. But if it's tied to a data asset, it needs to be tied to the data asset in terms of documentation as well. So that's the kind of the challenge with DBT or with Notion that a lot of our customers use as well, is that it lives, and if data changes or it's deleted, then you stay with the old page or the wrong page, basically.
Yeah, and the other thing, if you must document something else, I try to weave in those documentation links in as many spots as you can. So like if you have to have that Confluence page, it should be linked in like the table description in Castor. We actually are frequently even putting some of those details just on the top of dashboards in Looker, because it's a highly used dashboard. We're more likely to maintain that documentation than like a Confluence page that no one really ever looks at. So I would say that's another thing. Just like make sure you have links if you need to have content from somewhere else.
Awesome. I think there's some great answers there. I think next question up. This one for you, Lauren, but I think Arnaud might have some opinions as well. How do you set targets and measure documentation coverage progress in Castor?
Yeah, so for our last goal, we basically took I'm actually drawing a blank on what tables I did, how many there were, but it was 4+ popularity, which for us is a sizable amount of tables and columns, especially. Some of our tables are, enormous fact tables that might even have like 200 columns. So a lot of fields that need to be documented. So we took those, let's say it's 200 tables. I basically like assigned owners, made sure we had owners on all of those tables. And then we said, all right, we have to get to 100% by the end of the half. And every team meeting, I was like, this is where we are this week. What do we need to do to get you to 50%? What do we need to do to get you to 60%? And to be honest, I didn't start on that like showing progress until probably like halfway through the half. And at halfway through, we're at 30%. As soon as I started showing, it just popped immediately. It was a nice, especially when you can look at for you in particular that like you're at 20% while your colleague is at 70%. It's like a little bit of a competitive thing as well that I found like even motivated me. I was assigned as an owner to several tables. Like I was like, oh, I need to win. So I think that kind of like gamification of documentation is really helpful. And that was, very basic target setting there. And we will in this half, trying to set, I described having like a schema that we want to be like the gold standard, trying to have a target around that gold standard schema. That schema, which I wish had 200 tables, has many, many more than that. So the target might actually be around a combo target of like, how do we reduce the number of tables we have in this schema from X, Y, and then how do we increase our documentation coverage from, you know, A to B. And so likely 2 targets, but I'm you know, I set my OKR, and then I started, Luis gave me all of the bunch of data on that schema, and I was like, my OKR is impossible. So I already have to reset with all of that knowledge of where we are today. And you know, again, giving while setting that target's important. Also, just giving people the tooling to do it well. We actually like tracking it into G Sheet, where we can like give links to the tables and just figuring out like what mechanisms work well for the way that your team works is important too. So yeah, it'd be great if everything was going to be done inside Castor, but like a lot of times the G Sheet is what you need for tracking. So like, you know, not being held to like what the exact specifics of the tool at the moment. G Sheet works really well. And it lets me like, you know, I can tag people and comment, be like, what's going on with this one? It's worked pretty well.
It's funny. We've seen some interesting patterns on that one. On the kind of, you want the when you split out the tables to different owners, you want the effort to be to be even, right? To be fair to, okay, if 4 tables, it should be the same amount than these 4 tables. So you have a few features in Castor that makes the life of the last comer much easier. A feature called autocomplete, right? You're aware of it, and Lauren. So basically, if someone else has documented a column with the same name, when you start documenting that column, then the description of the former will be offered to you just to click and paste directly. So there's that, and there's also lineage propagation. So we're about to come up with a suggestion of split based on the number of distinct new columns not documented yet. Split, because if you have 100 columns but 80 of them are already documented elsewhere, then it's not the same thing as a table with 50 never documented columns, right? So this is kind of the balance, but we're going to provide some report suggestion on that for sure. That's one thing. And the second one you mentioned on reporting, definitely, I love what you said, Aaron, on the CSV. It's funny because weirdly enough, our end user population is made of data people, heavy data people. So they want the raw data, they want to see data and so on. So this is why within the Castor app, pretty soon we'll make available the, let's say, a report section where you'll be able to download all of these in the raw data format for you to play, to do the analytics you want, to split by owners, by schema, by tags, by popularity level, however you want to distribute it to your team. You'll be able to split and track, basically.
I feel like I should have picked that up when we were talking about like where to document something. The fact that Castor like picks up other fields with the same names that and where you can just say like use this definition, that is like a number one reason of actually documenting in Castor. It saves you so much time.
Yeah. Versus DBT, for example, which is a pain to duplicate always. Yeah. Just a big disclaimer. I was a big DBT doc user when I was at PayFit. So prior to that, trying to push and to enforce DBT documentation and so on. But yeah, we've done the stat. I think it's only less than 25% of the columns of a given table are specific to this table. Mm-hmm. It's even smaller. So it's 25. It was a maximum per our customers, basically. So it means that 75 of the columns are in other places and likely are already documented. Yeah. So this is how important is like efficiency of autocomplete, of propagation, and so on with regards to having a low effort documentation or maximum impact documentation, basically.
Well, I'm very excited about the reporting features.
Yeah, cool.
I know that you guys have been, and I'm always amazed too when I even ask them, like, oh, could you export this for me? And it's always like, yes, like you have it available. It's really amazing, like what you guys have been able to like aggregate via your metadata.
But and what's even amazing is when you ask for it again, then we put it in the product. Mm-hmm. That's how we work, basically, in a few words. But and one word as well on pragmatism as well is maybe you can tell Lauren, you cannot document everything. You have to like, it's not good to document everything. Some content is really short-lived. Some content will be deleted. Some content is never used. So there should be really a pragmatism focus. Like from where you are today, just look for what if I have 2 hours to spend across my team in this week, what has the most impact in terms of documentation effort and that's it, and do it. There's no do it all. You have to be perfect is not something we need to do because we don't have time, because there are much more urgent business topics as well to tackle. But do what's efficient. If you just allow a bit of time and make the most impactful stuff. I think that's kind of something I want to make clear is while we are building a data discovery, but also data documentation tool, the goal here is not to document everything, is to just help you make that 2-hour impact as big as it can be.
Awesome. Taking the next question is for Arnaud. How do you tackle column level lineage in Castor?
Ah, good. This is a big piece. Cool. So the first step on that one was to make to define like a success criteria, right? So this was super interesting. Is how do we know where we are? Are we good or are we bad on our existing column lineage technology? Like, what's the level? What's the status? So the way we've done it is we've simply counted all of the columns which belong to tables that themselves had column lineage, right? And so if we had column lineage for the table, then we should have column lineage for their column inside. And so this gave us the number of expected column lineage linked we should find. And so that's kind of how we set the kind of objectives and all out. And then it was basically SQL parsing. And it's not regular expression, it has to be SQL language parsing in a way. So you really have to dig into the logic to make a let's say a tree out of every query and to be able to parse it up. And step by step, you add more coverage, you tackle more edge cases, because of course this one is cross technology. So you have to generalize the different SQL syntax of BigQuery, Snowflake, and all of these to make it compatible to all and to make it scalable as well. Because of course, some of our customers have millions of queries per day, and we have to parse them all. And so, how do you make that efficient? How do you also? You don't want to. We load a lot of these queries, like the useful queries. We load them up in Castor. So you want to be smart about deduplicating the same queries as well. So there's a lot of logic, let's say upstream prior to parsing to make sure that we only parse what's useful as well. So I think that was so identify a target that you can track against, then identify the technology. And I'm just the CPO. I think it could be a huge interesting tech talk on the column lineage technology behind it, but I won't be part of it. Just be a listener on this one.
Awesome. I think fortunately that's all the time we have for today. Thanks, Arnaud and Lauren, for spending the time. I'm sure the audience really appreciated it. If you have any further questions, do drop an email to hello@castordoc.com, and I'm sure they'll get back to you ASAP. Thanks to everyone for attending. This has been great.
Thanks a lot. Great talking. Cheers. Bye, man. Bye, everyone.